All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Monday. How was the weekend? Okay, went all right. Anything fun? Nothing fun? Kind of, no? Yes, maybe? No? Just rest? Yeah. Avi, what'd you get up to? No? Just hanging out? Okay. There's David. All right. All right, let's jump in. So, on Friday we were talking about genocide, right? We said that the UN determined that, of course, this was a crime against humanity, and they did a convention in 1948 to describe this, to say what genocide was, in order so that they could understand it and sort of prosecute people in the future, right? And we said, of course, that the Holocaust might be, well, one of the most famous, if not the most famous, genocide in human history. But of course, it's not the only one, right? Many have happened since that time, with millions of people being killed or displaced or affected in some way, right? And as a little bit of a tangent, but not entirely a tangent, on Friday I was talking to you about Indian residential schools, right? So I gave you a very quick overview of what had happened here in Canada with our Indigenous people, the first people to come to North America and South America. They were, when Europeans started to arrive, they pushed Indigenous people aside, created the country that we know today, which is primarily organized around kind of white colonial ideas and infrastructure. And these people were cast aside, right? And arguably the government made very strong attempts to assimilate them or somehow make them go away. What does it mean to assimilate? Yeah, assimilate is to make something like something else, right? And so, the government was somehow hoping these people would go away, right? That they would be assimilated into Canadian society, so that there wouldn't be, Indians and non-Indians. There would just be Canadians. That's all there would be. And we said that part of the program to do that was Indian residential schools, right? And we said that these boarding schools were set up. At one point, it was made mandatory that Indigenous kids had to go to them. They were usually hundreds of kilometers away from where these children lived, so they couldn't go home on weekends or holidays. And again, the attempt here was to assimilate these children, right? To kind of remove any indigenousness from them, right? Their language, their culture, their way of thinking, all of that they were attempting to destroy that. And so these schools that were run by churches, they used pretty brutal methods of physical and emotional and sexual abuse to try to destroy these people's culture, And it didn't work, right? These people are still around. They are here. Their cultures are here. Their cultures and ways of living and ways of being have been heavily disrupted by what's happened here. But they are still around. But again, it's impossible to kind of overstate how awful this is. And again, it's something that historically we haven't talked about here in Canada. It hasn't been part of, when I learned Canadian history in school, we didn't talk about Indian residential schools. And in fact, we didn't really talk about Indians at all, or Indigenous people. All we kind of said was that when Europeans first came to North America, to where Canada would be, they traded furs with the Indigenous people, and then that was kind of it. And then, it became a white European history of Canada, and the Indigenous people kind of just disappeared from the story, right? But again, there's a lot of chapters of that story that deal with Indigenous people, and they're not great, right? They're an ugly, ugly history. So on Friday, I asked you to look for an argument, right, in a paper that we read or an article we read called The Ongoing Legacies of Canadian Genocide, right? And so we read that article, and we did a reasonably good job, I think, of coming up with the argument. Sorry. Oh yeah, I realized that I don't. I didn't have a slide for the argument. But we did come up with the argument, right? And Abby correctly identified that. I think you did, or was that the last one? That was the last one where you came up with the conclusion. Okay. This one we said that Pamela Palmater, the writer of this article, she was trying to convince us that we should look at what's happened to Indigenous people in Canada. We should look at this as a genocide. Right? We should think of it as a genocide. And again, as good critical thinkers, we should always ask ourselves why, right? Why should I believe that? And so she makes a very basic argument, right? She says that this is what the UN says is genocide. That's what genocide is. And then she gave us examples, and she said Canada has done all of these things, right? Not all at the same time, not to every Indigenous person. But she says it doesn't really matter, right? Because genocides don't have to happen in a small period of time. They don't have to be situations where millions of people are brutally killed. They don't have to reach a certain threshold, right? You don't have to kill a certain number of people before it becomes genocide. And you don't even have to be successful, right? You don't have to actually wipe out a group of people, right? None of those things matter. Did you do these things? Yes, you did. Well, these are genocidal acts, right? And so Pamela makes the case that we should consider what happened here in Canada as a genocide. But that's a difficult argument for a lot of people to accept. And why did we say that was? Why would this be a difficult argument for Canadians to accept or to believe? Yeah, we kind of have a reputation, a way we sell ourselves to the world, kind of a branding of being an open, friendly, tolerant nation. Genocide doesn't really fit with that, right? That's hard to think about. Avi, what were you going to say? Same thing? It doesn't fit with our reputation? Very true, very true. Why else do you think it might be difficult for Canadians to accept an argument like this? Because? Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, that's all really uncomfortable stuff, right? To think that your country is, has a genocidal history, right? That's right? Like what do you do with that, right? How do you feel about that, right? Ashamed, guilty. People might want to reject the argument because nobody wants to believe that about their country, right? That's awful. And actually, that point brings us to something I'd like to look at today. Oh, I saw this. This was kind of a political cartoon in a newspaper the other day. So, do you know what's happening? You know what's happening here? Do you know what this cartoon is trying to communicate? Okay, so yeah, so the back half of this looks like a Nazi death camp, right? But of course, what's on the front? Yeah, it looks like it's a residential school, right? So what's the artist saying about residential school, Indian residential school? What's he saying? Yeah, very good. Yeah, it's, Indian residential school isn't a school, right? It's a camp, right? It's a camp. It's a concentration camp for Indigenous kids. It just looks like a school on the outside, right? It's wearing a mask, but really something else, right? And that's a pretty strong statement, right? But this leads us to what I wanted to talk to today. So, number one, this question. So, what's the purpose? We're kind of engaged in this argument of, we have a history in Canada here, the treatment of Indigenous people. What does it matter, right? What is the point of labeling something a genocide or not a genocide years and years after most of these things happened, okay? The second question I'll have here is, what is justice? How can we achieve justice, and how can we heal from a genocide if a genocide has happened in our country? And third, how should we go about remembering the past? And why should it be remembered in one way rather than another way? Okay? 3 questions, but let me show you what I want to show you, and we'll talk about these things, okay? So, this is a news story from a couple of years ago. I'm just going to pull up the link here so I can put it into the live stream. This is a news story from a couple of years ago on CBC. And it has to do with a small German town. It has to do with a small German town, and it has to do with a bell. Okay? So, small German town, in a church, there's a bell, the bells ring, ding dong, right? And something was discovered about the bell a few years ago, and it started to cause all kinds of controversy as people were trying to figure out some of these questions. How should we remember the past? How should we look at it? How should the past kind of inform our actions in the present? Okay, and that's what this town in Germany is going to try to figure out. How do they deal with their past? Because what we just talked about, what Regina just said, is that, gosh, it might be difficult for Canadians to feel that their country was guilty of a genocide, right? How do you process that? Do you feel guilt? Do you feel shame? What do you do about that when you know it? And again, we're kind of having this debate, was there a genocide here or wasn't there one? But think about the Germans, right? Because the Germans 100% do have a genocide in their past. How do they deal with that? How do they move forward from it? And that's what this little story is about, okay? So, the link is in Microsoft Teams. No, it's not in Microsoft Teams. It's in the live chat right there. So if you're online, you can watch it there. We're going to watch the video in class, and then we're going to come back here, and we're going to answer these 3 questions, okay? Number 1, how is Germany engaging with its problematic past? So in what ways do we see Germans marking the past, okay? Marking the past of the Holocaust and the Nazis. How are objects involved in dealing with the Nazi era? So there's not only a history, but sometimes there's physical objects that come to us from that time. What do we do with those things? How do we deal with them, okay? And the third one is, what story does Germany want to tell itself about its history? And why is that a difficult story to tell? Okay? 3 questions. let's watch the video and then um, we'll come back and talk about it, okay? So, online people, we'll see you in just a few minutes. The link is in the live chat. So very interesting, no? Yes? No? Not interesting? Horribly boring? So, what kind of examples do we see of Germany engaging with its past? Well, actually, let's talk about the bell. What's the issue with the bell?
It reminds people what happened in the past.
Okay, yeah, it definitely does remind people what happened in the past, right? It's got Adolf Hitler's name on it with a big swastika, right? What else is the issue with the bell? What's the question? Anna, what's the question about the bell?
Why is it still sounding? Like, why did you
Yeah, why is it still in use, right? Why is it still ringing every day, right? And of course we could replace it with another bell, but why do we need that bell? Right? And so what are the two sides to this perspective? We talked to the mayor. What does the mayor say? Regina, what's the mayor say? He was in the purple shirt. Yeah. We talked to him first about the bell. Or just what's one side of the bell argument? Say again?
Does that girl the lady?
Yeah, Sigrid. She was out on her deck. Yeah. What did she say?
And he just said, like, does the girl have contaminated still?
Yeah.
Then people first didn't know that there's like the Switzerland. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people disagree with her bringing up the past because she got threats.
Yeah.
Was it her?
I think so, yeah. So she apparently there were threats against her, but her position indeed was like, yeah, like people don't know that this bell has a swastika on it and we're still using it, right? And why do you think that matters to her? Why does it matter to keep using that bell? What does it mean that bell is still in use?
They have removed them from the past.
It means what?
They have removed them from the past.
Yeah, they haven't removed them from the past, right? It's like something from Nazi times is still working, right? Like it's still in use, right? And again, it's kind of a symbolic thing, right? I know practically it really doesn't matter, right? It goes ding ding, that's it. But symbolically speaking, yeah, it's like nothing has changed up there, right? It's like the same bell that was ringing all throughout the Nazi Germany and World War II and the Holocaust and all of that stuff, still up there, right? The bell is still using. And again, it's like, it's as if, yeah, like there's a piece of that Nazi Germany thing still around, right? And again, it's not a practical thing, it's a symbolic thing, it's a feeling thing, right? But the woman we talked to in the video, she was like, no, it's a disgrace, right? To have this thing still working, awful, right? But then what's the other side of the argument?
It's a memory.
It's what?
It's a memory that exists.
Yeah, it's a historical artifact, right? It's this thing has been there for decades, right? And we, if you look at that town, you can see that they've actually preserved a lot from the past, right? It's a very old-timey kind of quaint German medieval town, right? It's kind of cute that way. So that town has actually done a lot to preserve their history, to kind of keep things the way that they were. But that bell to some people is part of it, right? We're going to keep things the way they are. It's a piece of history, which is true, right? So from there, we kind of go to that art exhibit, right? That guy is running an art exhibit called Hitler, How Could It Happen? And what does he say about why is it difficult to have any kind of exhibition about Nazi Germany or Adolf Hitler? Why is that a difficult, touchy subject? What do you think, David? Why is that art exhibition kind of difficult to put on? What does he say? Why is it difficult? Because what? I can't hear you. It's a sensitive topic, for sure, right? So the same way that whether a genocide happened here in Canada or not, that's a sensitive thing, and for the Germans it certainly is as well. What else is kind of problematic or difficult about it? Anna, what do you think? Yeah, right. There are still those who, I guess they believe in the Nazi ideology, right? They believe in those ideas of racial purity. They want Germany to be great again. They wish the Nazis won, right? There are still those people floating around, right? And so he said, you have to be careful because you want an exhibition like this to be, look what happened here in Germany. Let's make sure this never happens again, right? But you don't want it to turn into a shrine for people going and feeling good and wishing the Nazi stuff would come back, right? You don't want it to turn into a shrine. You want it to be, this is what we don't want to happen again. And so it's very difficult to deal with both of those things, right? I think we were talking to a historian, and he was saying, how has Germany been thinking about this history of the Nazis and the Holocaust? What have the Germans been doing over the last 60 or 70 years?
Forget it and move on.
Well, that's certainly some people's feeling, right? The young girl at the cemetery, yeah, that's what she said, right? She said it was, this happened a long time ago. I didn't do any of this, but we've kind of learned our lesson, right? We're kind of a great country now, and we need to put this behind us, right? So yeah, certainly some people are saying, why are we still talking about this 70 years later? Let's move on, right? We've done our thing. We've built a country that is much better than Nazi Germany was in all ways. Let's move on. Enough's enough, right? But then what do other people say? What did that historian say? Do you remember, Anna? No? Did you catch it, Abby?
You can't move on. So you shouldn't forget about it.
You shouldn't, yeah, and why should you not forget about it?
So that you're going to do the same thing.
Yeah, he said, we need to constantly re-examine our past, right? We need to constantly remember it, right? Because, that kind of thing cannot happen again, right? It cannot be allowed to happen again, right? And so it's interesting because we've got these two kind of ideas, right? We've got this horrible series of events in the past, or horrible period in the past. What do? Right? Do we move on? Do we say, yes, that happened, it was awful, but let's look toward the future a little bit and less toward the past? Or do we constantly need to re-examine it, right? Do we constantly need to remember and pay attention and mark what happened, right? And we can see that again through those little stumbling blocks that artist was putting in, right? And you can see out front of the very houses that people lived in, you can see their names in the stone and where they were sent, right, to die, basically. So there's kind of two sides. And what do you think? Do you think that these things need to be, do you think that Germany should move on? Or do you think Germany should have to continue to kind of relive it over and over and over again? Avi, what do you think? So don't forget it, but don't pay so much attention to it?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Ryan, what do you think? Move on?
Yeah.
Okay, why?
Because it's not necessary to start another war.
It's not necessary to what?
Start another war.
No, certainly.
In today's world,
Certainly it is not.
nobody wants to have war, really, so it's not necessary to like remember.
Okay. Oh, okay. Because you think that we wouldn't go down that path again anyway?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I understand that. Regina, what do you think? Okay. Right. Okay. Okay. So we should remember not only because there is a lesson to be learned here, right? But also out of respect, right? This millions of people were brutally killed, and millions of others had their lives torn apart, right? They lost everything. They had to flee to different parts of the world. They lost people that they loved. They were disconnected from people that they loved. So it was a heavily traumatic act, right? And we should remember that. Right? David, what do you think?
We should we move on as a society, but the other side we should get it as a lesson to teach future generation.
Yeah. This is a lesson and an important one to future. Yeah. Okay. Anna, what do you think?
I think it's important to do both, like to remember, because things are respectful of it.
Yeah.
And they also need to move on, like we cannot be stuck in time forever.
Right. So kind of a little bit of both, right? Yeah. And I think in many ways Germany has moved on, right? And you can see that the historian they talked to pointed out that Germans have been very careful about to basically to be patriotic, right? To say that, our country is a great place to live, but not to be very careful not to say, but the German people are great, right? They've been very careful to stay away from that idea because, of course, that was Hitler's idea taken to an extreme, right? So they were very careful not to be nationalistic, but very careful to actually be patriotic, right? This is a great country, it's a great place to live, we're doing great things here. Not the German people, rah, 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 right? That's kind of a different thing, and you can see how they've been careful about that. It's interesting to hear you kind of say different things, right? Whether you're, in favor of moving forward or in favor of remembering, or maybe a little bit of a mix of the two, because what you're talking about and how you're trying to decide how you feel on this issue has to do with this statement right here. I'm guessing nobody in the room reads German, do they? Anyone? Any German speakers? Didn't think so. Me neither, actually. But this, you remember in the video we saw the Holocaust memorial in Berlin with all those big kind of pillars, and you walk through them. It's a Holocaust memorial, and one part of the Holocaust memorial, this is written, and I think it sums up. I think it's a question that kind of illuminates the different positions, right? About should we move forward or should we remember, right? The Holocaust. Should we, just leave the bell where it is, let it ring, or remove the bell because it is connected to, an awful period of world history and German history. Where you kind of sit in terms of those issues, I think has a lot to do with what your answer to this question is. And in English, the question is this: is the Holocaust an aberration or a reflection of ourselves? What's an aberration? Want to Google it for me? Let's Google it. Let's Google it. Anyone have it? It's a what? An assault? A fault? Not quite. Here. A departure from what is normal, usual, expected. Okay? So something that's out of the ordinary, something that's unusual, unexpected, kind of a weird or a strange thing to happen, an unexpected thing. Okay? So the memorial is asking us this: is the Holocaust a weird thing, an unexpected thing? Is it something that would never happen again? Or is it a reflection of ourselves? Right? Is the Holocaust a very human thing to have had happen? Because I think how you answer this question determines how you feel about the other things. Right? If you think the Holocaust would never happen again, that we just never go down that road again, it's probably not important to remember it so strongly, right? But if you do feel that, what happened during the Holocaust could very easily happen again, that there's something very human about how things went, then yeah, it is something that you should remember. Right? And so that's a big question, right? And it's a question that all of us have to kind of answer for ourselves, right? Do we need to remember this? Do we think that it'll happen again? Is it something we should be concerned about? Right? And I think, Berlin and Germany is, has kind of answered this question for themselves, and they've gone to a lot of effort to remember, right? And we saw, outside of the main train station at the center of Berlin, what do you see? That sign with all of, not only the destinations that you can go to today, but all of the Nazi concentration camps are there, right? And that's kind of, I don't know about you, I got goosebumps seeing it, right? Seeing it there. And people see it every day, right? People who are going to work, going to school, they walk by that every day, right? There's a big memorial, and there's memorials in other cities as well, right? There's those stumbling blocks everywhere, right? And so there's a lot of remembrance, right? And the Germans have kind of I guess whether they want it or not, they have the responsibility to remember for all of us, right? Because, like the historian said, it happened there, right? That's where it happened, and so they have the responsibility to remind us all that, that kind of thing can happen again. But again, it depends on what you think, right? Very interesting. Anything else we should say about the bell or Nazi Germany? What do you think about the bell? Should they take the bell down? I know they did, but they did. It stopped ringing, and I assume what they did was they just replaced it with a new bell.
But the bell was like more than just a put.
The bell was more than?
Just to put, it meant something more than just that.
Right.
So why would you?
I think the bell is in kind of a museum now. So it's kind of, it's historical, it's a historical artifact, which it is, and I think that's where it is. It's sort of, it's acting as a historical artifact, but again, before it wasn't really, right? It was a functioning part of the town. And that's, again, why people were upset, right? That this Nazi thing is still a functioning part of the town, and you hear it every day in your daily life. And for women like Sigrid there, she was like, ugh, gross. Right? All right, so you want to take a little break? Okay with that? Okay, let's take a little break, then we'll come back and we'll switch gears a bit here. Okay. All right. So we're back. Again, kind of some big questions, right? Some heavy questions, but important ones, right? And again, we're supposed to be in here learning the lessons of the past, but some of them have to do with, are they likely to happen again, right? And in some cases, we don't know, right? We don't know what will happen in the future, but our beliefs will inform how we feel about that history, right? And again, probably each of us have a belief that answers this question, right? What were we seeing in the Holocaust? Was it something crazy and bizarre that would never happen again, or was it something that, could all too readily happen again in the wrong situation, right? Okay. So I have a little bit for you to read from the textbook, page 131 to 136. I'm just going to look and see remind myself what's in this section. For those of you on line, I'm just going to dump it into Microsoft Teams in 10 seconds. But I just want to remind myself what it is. Yes. So this section of the text will kind of describe the lead up to the end of the war, okay? So keep in mind, for most of the war, the Nazis are kind of winning, right? They take over France. They're able to take over parts of Eastern Europe. Britain is being bombed for a while, but then the Nazis stop. But really, the Nazis have been successful up to a certain point. But we're going to get to a point here in about 1941, so about 2 years into the war, where the tide is going to start to turn, right? And the Nazis are going to start to experience defeats, and they're going to start to be pushed back by Allied forces, okay? So it's kind of a darker, well, unless you're cheering for Germany, but it's a darker first half of the war, and then things start to look up a little bit later, okay? So just a few pages for you to read, a few questions for you to answer. So I'll turn you loose to do that, and I will put these in Microsoft Teams for the online people. $131. There we go. History. Okay, online people, that section of the text should be on in Microsoft Teams for you. Oops. Okay, hardworking people. I know we're not probably quite done that section, but we'll press pause on that for today. We'll come back to it first thing tomorrow. And that'll be it, okay? So I'll end the live stream here. Online people, I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.